Megyn Kelly, welcome to the show.
Shawn, so good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. I just want to say this is so surreal to me to be interviewing you. Throughout my entire career, we watched the Kelly File on deployments and to keep up with what's happening in the rest of the world. So just to be sitting here is it's very surreal, and I'm thankful for the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you for telling me that. I'm so excited to be here. I only knew a bit about you before you came on my show, and I said this after you left publicly, and not in a creepy way, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Like, that whole interview was so profound and really just affected me in ways that I'm not usually affected when I sit down with somebody. So it was a no-brainer when you asked me to come here. I'm looking forward to a long friendship, I hope.
Wow, that means a lot. Thank you so much. And I love that interview. So I just listened to it again today. But so thank you for that opportunity as well.
Thank you. Although I've decided I got to step up my studio now that I'm here in here. My God, I've been phoning it in. It's unbelievable in here.
Thank you. There's a lot of artifacts. It's turning into a museum. I gave you.
I got to start putting more pressure on my guests to give me things, important things. The best thing I've ever gotten from a guest is a signed basketball signed by, remember when Dennis Rodman went over to, he's the Henry Kissinger of our time, to try to find peace with Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un? Well, it's signed by 2 out of the 3. I got Trump and Dennis Rodman on there with all 3 of their faces on the basketball.
That's cool. That's got to be a one-of-a-kind thing.
Might be the most valuable thing I own.
Right on, right on. Well, let me, I like to kick it off with an introduction. Not that you need one, but here we go. Megyn Kelly, you were a journalist at Fox News for 13 years and moderated 6 presidential debates, including the first Republican primary debate in 2015. You hosted America's Newsroom, America Live, and The Kelly File. You are the founder of Devil May Care Media and host of The Megyn Kelly Show, one of the top podcasts in the world. Your 2016 memoir, Settle for More, debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. You have an impressive and varied list of notable interviews, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, Indian Prime Minister, I'm going to butcher that, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, former President Donald Trump, then Senator Barack Obama, President Joe Biden, Senator Mitt Romney, Michael Phelps, and the list goes on. You've won awards such as Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People, Vanity Fair's New Establishment List, and Hollywood Reporter's Women in Entertainment Power 100. In 2016, you became the second news anchor in history to be featured on the cover of Vanity Fair. You're a mother of 3, a wife, and a devout Catholic. And one of my favorite things about you is you do not waver in your values or beliefs. And that's hard to come by these days.
Oh. Well, thank you for that. I can tell my assistant has been here.
But
how old am I?
But so I just watched this movie this morning for the first time, Bombshell.
Oh, wow. You watched Bombshell?
I watched the whole thing this morning, and wow. I'd always heard about what went on over there, but to see it in that format, that's what you did is just so commendable. And I can't wait to dive into that. But
I have a lot of thoughts.
I mean, to me, you are a beacon of light in a lost world for women, especially in this upcoming generation. I mean, they're just facing so much, and there aren't too many positive role models in the world left, I don't think. And you're a great one. So,
oh, thank you. I definitely have a strong ethical compass. But I am open-minded to being persuaded I'm wrong. I always say it's delightful to find out you're wrong, because tomorrow you'll be less wrong than you were yesterday. But, certain core things that you grow up with from the church, from your parents, from your Girl Scout troop, though not today, but back when I grew up, they do communicate certain core values to you that ideally you hold on to throughout your life. And while like different interests may come and go, different judgments may come and go, the core set of values tends to stay the same. And that's at least been my experience. Though I have to admit, devout Catholic may be too strong because I think my priest would be sitting at home like, really? We missed a few appearances at Sunday Mass over the past year, but not too many.
Well, I would love to dive into your faith journey and how that's all going, maybe towards the end of the interview as well.
Sure.
But I would love to do a life story on you, starting at the beginning and going through your come up into being a mega news anchor and how you got to where you are today, and then maybe some current events at the end. But I have a subscription platform. It's on Patreon, and they're our top supporters. They've been here since the beginning. And so one thing that I do is I give them the opportunity to ask each guest a question. And it was overwhelmingly questions about you standing up for women. And so I kind of combined all those questions and I just wanted to ask you, especially being a father of a 8-month-old daughter, what is the best piece of advice for young women dedicated to rising to the top in today's generation?
Don't think of yourself as a woman. Just think of yourself as a worker and do it, a lot of it, all the time without complaint. That you're not above anything. I almost called my book Out Hustled as opposed to Settle for More, because I really think that's the word that explains my success. There's nothing particularly special about me. I'm not particularly brilliant or particularly talented in one way or another. I've just worked really hard, studied hard, and when I landed in this field, worked really hard to develop the skills that it would take to do well here. And anyone can do that. It does require each field requires some natural aptitude. I don't think this work ethic on stage in the ballet would have produced the same rewards for me. But once you narrow it down to, I think I have the natural talents that could make me succeed in this business, it's all about hard work. And so my advice to young women is the same as it is to young men. Get in there, do every job, even the ones that aren't yours, even the grimy ones that make you feel less than. Don't leave before your boss. Come in on the weekends, volunteer too. Take every assignment, even if you think it's beneath you, with a thank you. When you get positive or negative feedback, say thank you. When somebody gives you any sort of critique, explore it. Why? What did I do? How could I do better? If somebody edits your writing, ask them to have the marked up brief. Let me see it. Well, how did I go wrong? How could I do better? All of it is a learning opportunity. So I think all of that's important to becoming a valued employee or a star or whatever in your particular industry. But I will also say, whatever's thrown at you by your boss, by your colleagues, by your spouse, by your friend, by your office mate, the response is thank you. Thank you. Great.
Wow. That's a great piece of advice. Thank you.
Even if it's shitty, because now you've got this to deal with. You're figuring out, this is how I deal with a crappy person, an unethical person. This is a lesson to me in how I misjudge somebody as good who turns out to be not so good. Where did I go wrong? All of it is opportunity if only you will take an ever so brief time. You don't have to spend days and years to reflect on it.
Have you always lived by that philosophy, or is that learned?
I would say I put that to more use once I hit the professional field as a young lawyer. And then certainly when my first marriage was collapsing, that was a great opportunity to really pause, and figure some things out about myself. And thankfully that happened in my young 30s. So that set me up for a nice long run, since then.
Good. I also have this is a personal question. And, ever since I started doing this, and I kind of talked about why I started doing it on when you interviewed me, but ever since I got into uncovering corruption or the truth space or whatever you want to call it. It's almost like a beacon went out for all the weirdos to try to get on my podcast. And it gets really hard to determine who is completely full of shit and who's actually not manipulating facts to make it sound like truth. It's tricky. I think it's tricky. Do you find it tricky?
Yes and no. I mean, I have a whole team of producers who I really trust. Some of them have been with me for more than a dozen years and gotten me through Fox and NBC and now this show. So I have complete trust in them. So they
sift through it all.
I have more than my own radar to figure out who's telling the truth. But I still make mistakes because I think like you, notwithstanding my cynical newswoman background, and you've got to be somewhat cynical given your background too, I still trust people. I still kind of love people. My instinct is still to believe as opposed to doubt.
Yeah.
Unless you're a politician, in which case it's the opposite. I believe almost nothing.
Yeah.
But, when I was at NBC, I had that couple come on my show. I don't know if you remember this story, but the woman ran out of gas and a homeless guy gave her his last $20. She filled up her gas tank and it was just such a nice gift by the homeless guy. Anyway, turned into this whole thing. She and her husband wound up starting a GoFundMe for this guy. All these people donated. It was a feel-good story. Whole thing wound up being a fraud. They were all in on it. Before we knew that, I had the husband and wife on my show because they were under some scrutiny for maybe stealing some of the GoFundMe. I gave them way too much benefit of the doubt. They were total fraudsters.
Man.
It was so bad. But I wouldn't take it back if I could because I like that part of me. I don't want to lose that part of me.
Yeah. I just some of the stuff I worry about is things like the COVID vaccine, or I don't ever want to affect somebody's decision-making process off bullshit that was put out on my show. And I feel a huge responsibility to that. And so I was just curious how you sift through it.
I mean, that stuff was very tricky. The COVID stuff was very tricky. We were turned on by so many authorities that we were supposed to trust.
Yeah.
It's almost like too big to get your arms around what happened there. And I actually think it's one of the reasons why people can't go back there. Like if you do stories on COVID, they don't get numbers. And it's not because, in particular, the right half of the country doesn't have very strong feelings about it. It's just, pardon the term, triggering.
Yeah.
It's triggering. It's like people are pissed. Nothing changed. We screwed over our kids and ourselves. A lot of us took the vaccine and feel unhealthier as a result of it. People are worried about their children if they gave it to them. So it's one of those avoidance things now. But yeah, I did not get all of COVID right. I think I did okay. I'd give myself a B+ on my understanding of what was going on there. But it's very hard when you have so many previously trusted entities lying to you.
Yeah. Even, I mean, I wasn't for it, but I brought somebody on and I felt like the facts they were against it too. And I felt like the facts that they were pulling were they were pulling all these facts from all these other things and trying to create a narrative out of it. And I never aired it.
But, wow.
Because I didn't, if I don't believe them, then I won't air it.
Smart.
So
it's very hard to know. And then, I mean, I'll take you back to the COVID period where Alex Berenson wasn't allowed anywhere. He was a COVID vaccine doubter early on, former New York Times reporter. Then he turned an author. And he was saying some interesting things. I mean, I had interviewed him on Fox, and he seemed like a very credible, serious journalist to me. He never struck me as a crackpot. There are some people out there that you just know. So I said, well, let's put him on. I'd like to find out why he's so scary to everyone. And, Alex Berenson turned out to be right about not everything, but a lot. And I thought our duty in putting him on was just research everything he was going to say and find out what the other side was saying so I could tweak him, so that people could make up their own minds. But somebody like that, I didn't think it was right not to platform that guy at all, right? Like, it's a serious person. He's not a nutcase. He's not out there to hurt a bunch of people. But there are some people who are more in the category of what you're saying. And for me, I just try to stay away from them and let the team do the vetting.
Yeah. I should get more team members help.
Yes, you need the team.
But we'll get there. But so I want to start at the very beginning.
Okay.
Where did you grow up? Well, you might want to think about taking some of that cash and try to protect your purchasing power with precious metals like gold and silver. It's simple. Go to ShawnLikesGold.com or call 855-936-GOLD. You'll learn about top-rated precious metals company Goldco and how they can help you. They're a top-rated company with over 6,000 five-star reviews, tons of awards, and they support this show. And for my listeners, you can get up to a 10% instant match and bonus silver on qualified orders. So if you're worried about your money losing value, or you just want to buy some precious metals that you can physically hold on to, something that's real and been around for thousands of years, Goldco can help. So go to ShawnLikesGold.com or call 855-936-GOLD. That's 855-936-GOLD. Performance may vary. Consult with your tax attorney or financial professional before making an investment decision. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. As an adult, do you make it a point to carve out time to learn new things as often as you'd like? Or is day-to-day life so busy that you feel like you'll never recapture that sense of childhood-like wonder? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. What's something you'd like to learn? Gardening, a new language, or maybe something else? Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back-to-school era can come out at any age. Therapy is helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself, and it isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. Therapy is for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/Shawn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Shawn.
I was born in Illinois. My dad was getting his PhD at the University of Illinois. And then before I turned 1, we moved to Syracuse, New York. And that's where I spent pretty much the first 10 years of my life, where my dad taught at Syracuse University. And then we moved to Albany. So I basically just moved from one tundra to another, immersed in 4 feet of snow every winter, freezing our asses off, but loving it. Totally gray, totally freezing. The summers were almost non-existent, maybe a month. And then every other month was snowy with sledding. But I thought it was heavenly.
And you have how many sisters?
I had one sister who's she was 6.5, almost 7 years older than I am. And then my brother's 5.5 years older.
Okay. So you're the youngest?
Yeah.
Of 3.
I was the only one they really wanted, Shawn. My brother and sister were accidents. My mom had him when she was like 23 and 24. I was the only planned child, which means only coveted child.
There you go. There you go. What kind of stuff were you into as a kid? What did you like doing?
It's funny because I look back now, because now my husband and I are living such different lives than the ones we grew up with. My kids have a great existence, and we have some money, so they get to do some fun vacations, and they get to go to this camp, although it's not an expensive camp. But they're learning how to sail. I never did anything like that. So when I was growing up, I literally went through the sprinkler in my mom's backyard in the summer. Or the highlight was we'd go to my Nana and Pop-Pop's boatyard on the Hudson. I was swimming in the Hudson River in the 1970s when GE was doing all of
Oh,
its
man.
toxic dumps. I could have been at NASA. If only I had not taken in that amount of toxicity. Anyway, but it was great. It was heavenly because we'd sit out there. I was joking the other day with my husband. I'm like, I was thinking back. One of my favorite activities was to make mud pies, just mud pies when it rained. And then I said, my second thought was, we were poor. Like, how was that my favorite activity? But it was. We'd sneak out. My grandparents had a stand where they would sell burgers to the fishermen. And I could get a cheeseburger whenever I wanted. And then at night when nobody was there, none of the customers, my brother, my sister, and I would have our friends over and we'd play waitress where we'd get the little order pads. We'd make ice cream sundaes for each other. We'd have Elvis Presley movies on or the Brady Bunch, classic 70s TV. And I don't know if it gets any happier than that. You don't need to sail. You don't need a tennis. You don't need a yacht club. You don't need any of that crap. You can do it with mud pies, a little Elvis, and a great cheeseburger. I've never lost sight of that. I feel like all of that was an important ingredient to becoming a good journalist, frankly.
Were you close with your siblings?
Yes. There was enough of an age difference that when we were little, I wasn't that close to my brother. My sister took care of me. She was 7 years older, so she was always a caretaker and good to me. She was very funny, and my mom is very funny. All the women in my family have a very strong sense of humor. And my brother just sort of, I think I was annoying to him. He was annoyed by me because I was always in his stuff. I was messing with his gerbils when he didn't want me to. I picked up one and its tail fell off. I was like, oh shit. Buried it in the garbage. But then when we got older, as soon as I was like 16, my brother and I got closer. And my sister and I were always close. And now my brother and I are really close.
What did your mother do?
My mom is a nurse. And so she spent her whole life nursing at ultimately the Albany Veterans Hospital.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you lost your father at age 15, correct?
Yeah.
Of a heart attack.
Yeah.
How did you get through that?
I mean, the short answer is my mom she's really strong and always was. And that sense of humor was very important. She was able to crack jokes almost the night of, not quite, but almost, and kind of taught us how to keep laughing, even through the dark times. It was an odd time of life for me because my dad died December 15th, 1985. I was a sophomore in high school. It was sudden. It was right before Christmas, and it couldn't have been a more explosive event on our family. But at the same time, I was popular that year. I hadn't always been. I was very badly bullied earlier. But that year, I was popular. And I had lost some weight. I was starting to look better. My acne was clearing up. I was getting invited to these cool parties with, good-looking boys who started to ask me out. And so for a 15-year-old girl, all of those things are great things. And so I remember that year as just feeling such an odd mix of intense sadness and depression, and yet happiness and hopefulness about my life and like how it could be, and escapism, when not in terms of drugs or alcohol, but just like, going to the prom with the junior, right? Like, that's cool. Like shopping for a dress. Back in those days, we didn't have cell phones, like just waiting for him to call. And then he did call. I remember those moments almost as acutely as I remember the sadness around my dad's death. I think just given the value system of a 15-year-old girl.
Where it happened suddenly?
So he was only 45 and my mom was 44. And he really hadn't had any health problems. He wasn't an exerciser, 1985, a lot of people weren't. He had a relatively stressful job. He was a professor first at Syracuse and then at SUNY Albany. But he loved his job. He wasn't heavy, but he did smoke and he drank. Not to excess, but he smoked. And about a week or 10 days before he died, he thought he was having some heart trouble, and he went to the ER, and they told him it was heartburn. So he came back relieved. Other than that, there had not been any sort of warning. And the night he died, it was a Sunday night. My sister was home from college because it was close to Christmas. My brother was still at his college, which was not too far from where we lived. And said goodnight, went upstairs. And I just remember my sister waking me up shortly after midnight saying, "Wake up, Daddy had a heart attack." And it's like an otherworldly, it's an out of body experience, you know?
Wow. That's sad. You had just mentioned that you were bullied as a little girl. Why were you bullied?
Why?
Why?
That's an interesting question. I think it's because I had a fairly big, not huge, but fairly big personality. So I attracted attention, which is somewhat dangerous when you're young. Kind of always. It could be potentially dangerous, but when you're young, most kids just want to fly under the radar, have friends. I wasn't trying to get attention. I just had a large personality. I've always laughed that I consider myself, now I'm fairly attractive, though it's going downhill as I get older. It's fine. But I have an unattractive girl's personality because that's who I really am. That's how I grew up. I was never good looking. I wasn't a cute child. I wasn't a particularly good looking tween. It wasn't until I got, later in high school that I was like, I need to work on this. I can do better. Got to lose some weight. I got to get to a dermatologist. I had a big space between my two front teeth. I'm like, I got to get that fixed. I got to put some sun in this hair. And I started teaching aerobics. My brother said, just casually one time, he said, "The girls with the best bodies all do aerobics." I was like, that's what I'll do. So anyway, I do think it was just, if you have a big personality, you're potentially a target as a kid.
How would they bully you?
Well, I had some bullying when I was in 4th grade that was unpleasant before I left Syracuse, but it was sort of more normal bullying. But it was bad. Like, I was at a girl's birthday party and they all started flicking me. All of them. I was like, kids can be so mean. And I remember calling my dad and he came to get me early. And when we walked inside, I remember he looked at my mom and my mom looked at him like, "How is she?" kind of thing. And my dad gave her the thumbs down. But that's not, I remember it. Here I am all these years later, but it was the 7th grade where things got bad. And really, if you could have seen me in 7th grade, Shawn, honestly, like, I can't believe those girls picked on me. I had enough problems. Why would they have picked on that version of me? But they did. And I've never named the ringleader, but she knows who she is. And she just turned every person in the school against me. She decided I was out. I was otherized. And I went from having lots of friends to having no friends for almost a year. And 7th grade is a tough year.
Mm-hmm.
That's 12. You're very fragile. You don't really have all the skills you need to deal with that kind of a thing. And on top of that, it was at a time when, talking to my parents about it was unthinkable. We weren't talking about bullying or like going to guidance counselors about it. Just wasn't a thing yet. So I was ashamed about it. So I didn't want anyone to know in my home. And so it was like a year of torture in a way. It was like an extended torture.
What ended it?
I don't know.
They just gave up?
She just decided one day I was acceptable again.
There's a lot of kids that go through this today, especially with the cyberbullying and it's a big problem that a lot of kids are dealing with. And so I'm curious if you have any advice for kids that are being bullied? What could you have done back then to end it? Or
Yeah, if I could talk to the 12-year-old version of me, I 100% would say, tell your parents. They can help you. And it doesn't have to be, you can establish some parameters like you have to agree not to call the girl's parents, something like that. But your parents can help. And I, as a parent, would absolutely intervene if this were happening to my child in whatever way I could. Because while I do think you can learn a lot from some bullying, like some short stints of bullying, I think it actually creates a more empathetic person, right? You're less likely to bully, I think, if it happens like that. But if it goes on and on and on, it can cause real damage. I still think it affects my relationships,
really?
my friendships. Yeah.
How so?
I'm not good at pursuing friendship. Like once I have a friend, I'm a good friend, but all the friends I have pursued me.
Interesting.
I'm very wary of like
People.
rejection and getting, I don't know, hurt, getting hurt.
I wanted to ask too, I didn't want to skip over the bullying when you brought that up, but I also wanted to ask about advice for people that have lost a parent as a child. And what advice would you have for that? Because there are a lot of kids that lose parents, and me coming from a military background, I know a lot of Gold Star kids. And so every time I get the opportunity to talk to somebody like you that has been through it, I have to ask.
Well, I think number one, lean into faith, even if you're not faithful. That's a good time to start. Just go and sit there. I used to be so comforted just by sitting in the church. One of my frustrations when my dad died was I couldn't drive. I was only 15. I just turned 15 a month earlier, so I really wasn't even close to driving. And so I'd ride my bike to the church and I'd sit there, but I couldn't get to the cemetery because it was too far away. And I really wanted to sit by the cemetery very badly. It's just, you knew physically that's where he was. So I think young children need that time to say goodbye. It's not a 1 or 2 day process at a wake and a funeral. There will be time of needing to sit with God or by oneself, maybe in a place like a church with the candles and the windows where you just feel it's bigger than you, or by the gravesite. And I think as a parent, I might ask, like, is that something you want to do? Because I wouldn't have suggested that to my mom. She could have driven me, but there was no way I would have asked that because she was grieving and I wouldn't have wanted to upset her.
Mm-hmm.
But she would have done it. And I think that's maybe a parent could go to the kid and say, do you want that? I can drop you off. I can pick you up. I don't have to be standing there for it. I guess I also want to say, this is sort of part 2. This sounds weird, but there is a silver lining to it, because I know my friend just lost his wife and he has 2 young boys. She just died suddenly last September. And he was like, can you tell me what to say to them? Like, can you tell me anything to make me feel better about what just happened to them? And this is in that category. The biggest gift to come out of losing my dad was the fact that you understand mortality in your limited time here like no other. You can't understand it the way someone who's lost a parent or a loved one at an early age understands it without going through that. And so again, if you spend the time reflecting on what it means, what the pain signifies to you, then you can arrive at the obvious conclusion, which is you must make decisions in your life like it's an emergency. It's the old no tomorrow is promised, but you just know it on a gut level. So you can't waste time. You can't waste time in a relationship that is unhappy, in a job that is unhappy, in a you that is unhappy. You must take active steps always, always to improve your situation. And the longer you sit around and think, well, I'll meet the right person and I'll be happier, or my boss will finally recognize what a star I am and give me that great role or raise I want, and it doesn't happen, the more you get to the point where you realize, oh, and I have to be the one to change it. No one's coming to save me. It's just the MK show. You know, I have to make the changes. I have to do it, succeed or fail. It's right now. So I wound up a happier person, I think, at 53 than I probably otherwise would have been. I think I probably would have been much more complacent about my happiness if I hadn't had that loss. And that's one gift my dad was able to give me.
I think that's some of the best advice I've ever heard in this room when it comes to that. And thank you. We've had a lot of discussions about loss, and that was top notch. I'm curious. You had mentioned leaning into your faith. Do you feel like your father's ever visited you since he's passed?
Many times. Many times.
Any specific example that sticks out?
I mean, certainly right after he was gone, we had a lot of signs from him right after we lost him. I mean, they were really kind of stunning. But for me, probably the biggest was when I was little, my dad used to take us camping, and we'd go to this place on Lake Ontario and we'd rent these cabins, low rent, but so fun. I used to call the lawn chair for sleeping overnight inside the house. My brother and sister are like, she's an idiot. Great. We've got the bed. And my dad used to play his guitar for us around the campfire all the time when we were camping there. So there are certain songs that he used to sing to us that are, I will always associate with him in those memories, mostly by John Denver, Neil Diamond, that era. And one time I was living in Chicago. I was a young lawyer. I wasn't that young. I was like 30. I was learning how to play guitar. Not well, but I was learning. And I had a book of, sheet music, and I was really missing my dad. At 30, I'd lost him for 15 years, but of course you think about him and some days you just really wish you had your dad there and you could ask him for advice. And I was just feeling blue. And I turned the page in this guitar book, and there was this song that he used to sing to us all the time. And I don't actually know the name of it, but it goes, it takes a worried, worried man to sing a worried song. Oh, it takes a worried, worried man to sing a worried song. And it goes from there. And I was like, oh my God. And I could play it. I'd learned enough chords that I could play it. And I strummed that guitar and I sang the song to myself. And I cried, and I knew he was there. I knew he brought me that moment. I don't purport to know how it works, but I know what happened that day.
I love hearing that. Can I share something with you?
Yeah.
I just had something happen to me a couple weeks ago, I guess about a month ago now, but I had... it's Gabe again, and who we had discussed,
Yep.
when you interviewed me. But so I'm going to try to get through this quick. But I went to Vienna and I interviewed this gentleman, Ahmad Massoud, who's the leader of the Afghan resistance, and he told me a bunch of stuff on the interview that I get paranoid when I start doing these type of interviews, uncovering corruption and do you get paranoid about that at all?
No, but I'm not dealing with that kind of stuff. I mean, you're in the thick of it.
Yeah. So anyways, I worry about our own government. He is the third person I've interviewed that said we're giving $87 million a week to the Taliban. And so we started a whole movement here. And once the word kind of got out, all of my former colleagues are all texting me, do you have protection? do you have security? And so then I started getting really paranoid because these are the guys that I used to work with at CIA and
They would
special
know.
ops. And yeah. And so I got home came into work on June 28th. And when you walk in the front door down there, there's a big hockey jersey, a Panthers Wounded Warrior hockey jersey. And so when Gabe died of a heroin overdose. And he had started this, he kept telling me he was junked out a lot. And he was telling me that he wanted to start this Wounded Warriors hockey team. And he was going to walk into the Panthers stadium and find who he needed to talk to. And I was like, yeah, right, Gabe, whatever. Okay. I hope you do. Well, he did it. And when they went to tell him that they were going to fund his team, that's when they found him in his apartment. So fast forward, I had mentioned that Gabe's a protector, and I was really paranoid about this interview, and I was a little concerned for my team, and and it was kind of sinking in what we had just done. I come into the studio here for the first time since we got back, and that jersey was on the ground. And that jersey, I mean, it probably weighs 35 pounds. It's a huge frame. It's a framed full-size hockey jersey. And it was just weird because I've been here for 3 years now. And that frame has been there for 3 years. No crack in the frame. Glass is fine. No scuffs on it. Everybody in the office was in Vienna with me. So it couldn't have been any of them other than my assistant who I asked, and she didn't do it. And so anyways, the day goes by and it's just in my head. I'm like, why did that fall? Like, what is Gabe trying to tell me? Are you warning me about something? And so I stayed here late that night. Everybody was out of here. Everybody was out of both buildings that are here. And it was just me in the parking lot at the end of the day. And I'm pacing around, kind of having a conversation with Gabe in my head, just, what are you trying to tell me here? And I couldn't figure it out. And I went home and I told my wife, Katie, about it. So this is the weirdest thing. Gabe's jersey fell off the wall. It's been there for 3 years. And she's like, the Florida Panthers Wounded Warrior hockey team jersey? And I said, yeah, that's the one. And she goes, Shawn, the Panthers just won the Stanley Cup.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, holy shit. And I was like, today's June 28th. That's the anniversary of Operation Red Wings. Those rounds that I just showed you up there, I found it on June 28th. And to me, I totally broke down, and a happy breakdown, but it was, I could hear his voice up there going, I'm not trying to warn you about anything, Shawn.
I'm trying to celebrate.
The fucking Panthers just won the Stanley Cup. And, but to me, I mean, I wanted to tell that to you after our discussion about faith and that kind of stuff that we had on your show. But to me, that's like proof. It's too many coincidences in one incident to be anything else. And people are always searching for, does consciousness continue? Is there life after death? And to me, it's like a supercharge in your faith to know he's got me.
Yeah. I feel like there's no avoiding it. There's just no avoiding it. It's just too present. These reminders, if you just pay a modicum of attention, you'll see it. I don't know how one couldn't see it. There's only so many things you can write off as, oh, that's a coincidence. Oh, that means nothing. It's like, I've in my life, I just had way too many for me to ever be convinced it's not him. It's not an otherworldly force trying to communicate something to me. And I also think it's just there's so much hubris behind the notion that, well, you're wrong. It's over. It's done. How do you know? We're so fragile and we know almost nothing. I love these big swinging, right, guys who are like, and gals like, no, it's just a no. Okay. I mean, who the hell knows? We need to be humble enough to know that. I'll tell you something, another good one, not in my case, but my dear friends, Allison and Tom Barklage, lost their boy, Blake, at age 17. I did a story on it in October of 21. He died suddenly of myocarditis. And they don't know if it, I know people are going to say it was a vaccine. They don't know. He had been vaccinated, but he definitely had myocarditis. And two greater people you'd never meet. Well, one of the things that they told me was Blake really wanted to go to Clemson. And the dad said, I don't know, Blake, you know, I'm not sure. Cause he's like, I'm going to get into Clemson and I'm going to get a scholarship from Clemson so we can afford it. And Tom was like, if you get a scholarship, you can go. After Blake died, they called all the colleges to which Blake had applied and said, you know, he died. Don't give him a spot. Like, give it to some kid who's applying. But something happened at Clemson, and Tom came home one day, and there was the big envelope, and it said, not only is he admitted, well, here's a scholarship for him. So Tom and Allison is just, you know, completely blown away by it. And when we aired this piece of the story, somebody from Clemson was watching. So this guy at Clemson, high up in the administration, contacted Tom. And they started talking. They became friends. Tom invited him to this memorial golf tournament he has in Blake's honor every year. Blake loved golf. And I went this year. I don't golf, but I went for them. And I met this guy from Clemson. And that day, the guy had been on the golf course, and he gets to one of the holes, and he said, he or the person with him, I can't remember, but one of them said, Blake, give us some help. You know, it hasn't been a great day. We need something. And this guy, who's not a very good golfer, hit the only hole in one of his life. And it happened to be on the hole where if you manage to hit a hole in one, which nobody does, you get a BMW.
Oh, man.
So the epilogue to the story is at Blake's memorial, Tom Barklage stands up there and he says, he tells the story. Everybody's like, this is unbelievable. And Tom says, and I just want you to know that the one thing I always knew about Blake was that he really wanted me to have a BMW. Tom said to the guy.
Wow.
Anyway, the guy got to keep his BMW, but it's such a great, I just don't believe for a second that, that none of those things are connected.
It's just like, every time I hear this stuff, it's like a restoration of faith and you know, because I don't know about you, but mine, it goes up and down, you know, and it seems like as long as you are open and paying attention, you know, and not too wrapped up in your own bullshit, all the signs, they seem to be there. At least for me, they just keep coming and coming and coming. And you know, another thing is, that was a low point. Like the last one that I just told you about was a low point for me, and maybe not a low point, but a lull. And like, I just wasn't really into the faith stuff. I was starting to doubt again. We'd had a study at my house, and we were talking about life after death, and somebody had said, yeah, well, you know, it's probably like before you were born. And I thought about that, and then that started creeping back in my head about, well, shit, what if the lights just go out and that's it? And then that happened.
But that's somewhat comforting to me. Like, I think about when you have your babies, I just think you can tell your babies are still closer to the other side. There's something just truly magical about them. There's like a knowing, there's a beauty, there's a specialness. It's not just because they're babies. I just think that you can tell they're closer to the other side still. So that statement doesn't imply that that's a bad place to be, you know, prior to you being born. It's just not a conscious knowledge of every day-to-day activity here.
That's a good point.
I'm okay with that.
That's a good point. Well, moving on, when did becoming an attorney sound appealing to you?
Very quickly. Suddenly is what I mean. I wasn't planning on being an attorney. I went to Syracuse thinking I would be a journalist because I had taken a high school aptitude test that said that I should be a journalist. And my guidance counselor wrote me a recommendation, my only recommendation for college. It was so pathetic. And he wrote, she says she wants to be a political journalist, which I actually didn't even remember. And then he actually wrote in the thing, Meg's very strong in English and social studies. Math and science aren't her thing. Who writes that in a college recommendation? It was the 80s. It was a different time. So I went to Syracuse thinking I would be a journalist, though I didn't get into Newhouse, which is the very strong journalism school, but I got into the political science school. And before I knew it, I started thinking about political science and government, and maybe there would be a role for me. And I said, well, I think I'd like to be a DA. And somebody said, well, then you got to go to law school. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm going to have to start focusing on my grades then. And I did. I focused on my grades. I kept a good GPA, and I wound up going to Albany Law School, which is my hometown. And I had a great education there. I loved Albany Law School a lot. And then, one thing led to another. I never did prosecute cases, though.
So you wanted to be a journalist before an attorney,
Yeah.
and then wound up being a journalist.
Yeah.
What was the draw to journalism?
It was exciting. I always liked breaking news. Like I see it in my kids here and there. Like when Trump got shot, I was sitting in my living room, and my little Thatcher, who was 10, said, Trump got shot. I'm like, what? I thought he was messing with me. And he goes, he got shot in the ear, but he's okay. What? And of course, I run over to my phone, and sure enough, he was exactly right. And then I see him updating the whole family on the family text change. Trump was shot today, took a bullet in the ear, appears to be okay. And it's like, anyway, I think some kids just have an affinity for being the one to break the news. And I had it. And I did a little, like a 2-day internship with the Albany Times-Union when I was a sophomore in high school. And I loved that. I loved being on the phone next to the reporter who was on the phone calling his sources and getting the story. Then I watched All the President's Men, which is full of inspo. And that's kind of how that ball got rolling. And then I got sidetracked with the law thing. I mean, I never thought that I could go to law school and be a lawyer. I just wasn't thinking about myself in those terms. Like Megyn Kelly Esquire sounded so important. And I just had never even considered a life that looked like that. I just thought I'd be more of a grizzled shoe leather reporter on the beat in the field, breaking news. And then I just became quite dazzled by the notion of being a respectable attorney who people would have to take seriously because I had Esquire after my name. This is the way I was thinking back then. Before I knew it, I had done it.
So were you outgoing before? Were you outgoing before you got into that?
Yeah, I was outgoing, sure.
Okay.
I wouldn't consider myself an extrovert, but I'm outgoing. I'm not one of those people who gets totally energized by being in front of a big crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Like Rush Limbaugh. I saw him many times. I was kind of friends with him. And you'd put him in front of a crowd, and man, he would come alive. The chest would puff out, and the voice would start to boom, and the pupils would dazzle. It was just, you could see it. I'm not like that. I can do it, but I don't have that's, I think, what a true natural extrovert is. But outgoing, yes, I'm an easy conversationalist and happy to interact with others.
So you never did become a DA?
Never became a DA. Basically racked up $100,000 worth of debt and realized I was going to make 30 grand a year with 100,000. I would have been below the federal poverty level. And I was like, I've had 25 years of being poor. I don't wish to be poor any longer. I would like to make some money. And the thought of making money was so delightful. I can't tell you. It's like, I remember the prospect of earning like a real paycheck because I was going to either make 30 grand a year going with I wanted to work in the Manhattan DA's office, and you had to live in the borough in which you prosecuted. So 30 grand a year in Manhattan. Or I was getting job offers and interest from firms that were offering me $85,000 a year to start as like a young whippersnapper. And I did the math, doing what my rent would be and how the cable would be. And then I remember seeing I was going to have like $900 left over a month. And I was like, oh my God, I would have $900 a month to spend or save or whatever. It seemed like the greatest fortune. And I realize that still is a fortune for a lot of people, but I remember the feeling of when it was a fortune for me. And I happily shed the dreams of being a DA and went to big law.
Wow. When did you get into journalism then?
So I practiced law for about a decade. And
A decade?
Yeah.
Wow.
Just over 9 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So I graduated law school when I was 25 and I left the law when I was 34. So nine and change.
Did you excel as an attorney?
I think so. Yeah. I was at one of the best law firms in the world, and Jones Day, and I was on the partnership track. They were telling me I was going to make a partner if I stayed one more year. I tried tons of cases with these great partners there and was arguing in front of federal appellate courts across the country, which is, that's a level below the Supreme Court. I was taking depositions all the time. I was arguing. I was on my feet making arguments and motion practice and doing mini trials and TROs. And I loved it for a long time. But the problem with my out hustled is you can burn out if you don't put some self-nurturing in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the law, they say, is a jealous mistress. And my mistress was very demanding. She did not want me to be with anybody but her. And I just had so many vacations where I had to work the entire time. Never took a weekend. Never. I miss funerals. I miss weddings. I don't regret it because in the same way I don't regret the hours I put in, especially early on in my career as a journalist, it all got me to where I am. The people who didn't do as well as I did in the law or in journalism didn't put in that time. For the most part. Maybe some didn't. I just don't know about them. But the people I looked around, they weren't willing to make those kinds of sacrifices. I think soldiers can probably understand this, right? It's like some will go the extra mile every time, no matter what. And probably some won't. Not everyone's going to be a Navy SEAL. So I burnt out. And there was an aha moment when I was considering about whether I was going to take this partnership because they don't give them out to everybody. And if I took it, it would be at the expense of somebody else. And I already knew I was feeling unhappy. Looked around. Everybody there was an older guy with like an ex-wife or two and several kids in private school. And they were handcuffed to the place. And I just thought, I can do something else with my life. I can do something that I find exciting. The line I wrote in my journal was, I am more interesting than this. I am more interested than this. And I resolved to change my life.
How old are you at this point?
I was 32 when I had that aha moment.
So you're ready to totally reinvent yourself at 32?
Yes.
Was there any fear?
There was a little fear of not getting the partnership. I just kind of thought, wouldn't it be better to stay and get the partnership than run around the world saying, I made partner at Jones Day, which is not easy. And in the end, I just thought it was going to be an unfair thing to do to my colleagues, sort of taking it at the expense of somebody else and my firm, which I loved. And I still have close relationships with some of the people there. I just thought, what kind of a way is that to leave? You take the feather just so you can put it in your cap and then you ride off into the sunset and screw them over. So Yeah, that was the only scary piece, not to get like that brass ring that I've been working so, because when you're in, I know to the outside world, they're like, who gives a shit? We don't care whether you were a partner or not. But when you're working for it, it seems like everything. So anyway, but then there was the big question of what to do. Now what?
Oh, you didn't even know what you were going to do.
No. I was like, well, I used to be a telemarketer. I could go back to that. I don't know. I really didn't know what to do. But